Well, hello there. We are live.
Oh.
There you go. You can hold it. Can you see us?
I can see you.
No. You can't see anybody?
I can see some. Yeah, I can see you guys.
You sure?
You see
Yes.
us at least?
Yeah.
Yes, from this perspective,
Okay.
yes, much better.
And so we gotta remember to talk up. But
Yeah.
how you doing, everybody?
Yo.
We just came from seeing the film A Quiet Place, starring Emily Blunt, John Krasinski. We're gonna give you our, positives and negatives of the film, and
Hot off the presses.
hot off the press.
Immediate quick reaction.
Our immediate quick
quick
reactions
reaction.
of this movie.
Anybody want to go first? I'm still trying to put together my thoughts on this joint.
I mean, for me, I would say that it has a lot of promising ideas and concepts that ultimately it falls short of executing smoothly, especially into the second half. But it's supported by a fantastic performance by John Krasinski as well as Emily Blunt. So
I really enjoyed, I remember Millicent Simmons, who's the young daughter, she's an ASL actress, and I remember her from Wonderstruck, and she was really good in that, and she's also really
fantastic
good in this.
for sure.
I have negative thoughts about child actors. Sometimes they can be annoying, but
They
she
are
was
hit and miss.
they're hit and miss, but she's
Yeah.
really good in this, and it's one of the highlights. Another highlight is the beginning is really filled with tension, and it grabs you. It's a really good opening
it has
for a
an
film.
intrigue and mystery to it that I think really hooks you in pretty quickly, especially in the first couple minutes.
For a first film for Krasinski, first film directing and writing, I think it's a solid start. It's not perfect, and I can't, I don't know that I could recommend full price ticket for it, but because there are just a lot of logical errors in the film, but the performances are solid.
True.
And the first, I would almost say the first 3/4 of the movie are exceptional. When this
About
movie,
2 acts,
yeah,
for
when
me.
this movie builds tension, it builds it perfectly. You could cut the tension with a knife in certain sequences. The opening 5 minutes, is phenomenal. That's the kind of thing. That's A+ directing right there. So he does great there, but it kind of falters as we move towards the
Well,
third
we'll
act.
get to the cons in a minute. Another one thing I wanted to talk about is this particular scene with Emily Blunt and how she sort of handles it, and her facial expressions. It's actually pretty brilliant. How you weigh a pregnancy versus monsters versus survival. And the women, what I like is that the women are really central to this story. The men are, there's John Krasinski and his character, but the women are really central, and they really are the ones that figure out the problem and provide the solution. So I really like that aspect of the story.
But to add to the positivity, I will say the sound design is very exceptional, as it should be with horror films. But in this one, it's very courageous and very bold to actually keep a good chunk of this film, at least the first half of it, no dialogue.
Yeah, that's
whatsoever,
great.
Relying on the cinematic language and the mise en scene to actually tell the story emotionally and to see these characters progress through their actions. That's good filmmaking.
Yeah.
And that's something worth applauding, even if there are parts of the film that don't work.
No, exactly. No, I love the first half where there's no dialogue.
Sure.
It's all sign language. It's all communicated through visuals, and I think there's one sequence in particular. There's one sequence in particular that I thought was great. You mentioned it with the scene you mentioned with Emily and the baby, and you see a snippet of that in the trailer, but the trailer doesn't do it justice. That's white knuckle stuff. And
It is.
that's white knuckle stuff. Blunt.
One of the more suspenseful.
Emily, we all know that she's good, and we all know that she can carry a performance, and she's really good at she's got good struggle face.
Yeah.
She has a good, she has a pretty good range when it comes to a lot of the dramatic and more suspenseful and action-driven stories. It's just, we would like for her to be in better roles
and
much
do better. But now on to the negatives. Like
Yeah.
these are they're like the worst fucking parents in cinematic history. Like they
So bad.
are
Truly.
terrible parents, and then they keep having children in this post-apocalyptic world. And it's like, why would you want to bring more children into this world and you can't take care of the ones that you have? So that really bothered me.
Very
Yeah.
romantic.
Yes, no, like the movie does a really good job of establishing without dialogue that these two are in love. So they do a good job of explaining why they have so many kids, but they never. It becomes all the more problematic when you realize the kind of world they're living in. Like the opening scene is them raiding a pharmacy, and I'm like, you two, the first thing y'all need to grab is condoms because you clearly can't keep your hands off yourselves. But in a world where silence is golden,
Right.
why do you want babies? I don't understand. Pregnancy and babies are the noisiest thing ever. No.
I think to help really encapsulate this point is just a lot of the characters' actions are just happening mostly out of coincidence or just out of sheer necessity because the script couldn't find an interesting way, because this was written by 3 writers, including the director, and they couldn't find an easier or simpler way to really get these characters to make these decisions logically and almost in the human way. And they just sort of have to happen because that's sort of what the story
says.
The script says, but more importantly, that's what the genre is expected, particularly within horror thriller. So unfortunately, it falls into those trappings.
Yeah, nothing is worse than having to watch a movie where you see what's coming and you now have to wait like 15, 20 minutes for the characters to learn what you've already learned. Like the movie spells it out so effectively that you're like, how did they miss this?
Right.
How did they not pick up on it? And
Right.
and I want to go into detail, but we don't want to spoil nothing.
We don't want to give too much.
Yeah.
I think for me, just the little details, people not knowing where their children are at, children disappearing, people being by themselves, just typical horror tropes that I think the
Right.
film really tries to subvert, but doesn't quite do a good job because they're not
falls
sure
back.
how.
Yeah.
And I think, it gets in the way of the direction. I think, like you said, for Kraskinski, for this to be his first film, it's a solid film, but the writing is it's weak in so many areas. It needs work.
You can tell.
How do you guys feel that the monsters only reacted to human sound?
For
Not
me,
nature or anything.
yeah, I feel like the sound was one of the biggest issues that I kind of had going through. Is like you have this really established viewpoint of just basically focusing on the sound design, focusing on what the sound, how the sound is communicated through the monsters and how they have to keep low, and it just kind of confused me at times. Eventually it does get explained, but then at the same time it brings up the question, like, how did a lot of these characters, or at least the world itself, did not figure out this particular solution. So
That's something the movie probably, and I know with like the limited budget and the story they were trying to
felt
tell,
that way,
they couldn't go into detail, but mild spoiler, it's not really a spoiler, they don't really explain where these things come from. And with some movies it's fine, but the problem is with the rules of these creatures and the fact that they're setting this up as like a post-apocalyptic scenario, you're like, how did the rest of the world not figure out how to beat these things? Their weakness is pretty obvious when you think about it, and they're not so invincible that conventional weapons can't affect them. So when you finally get to that point where it's like, oh, this is what you do, you're like, wait, no one thought to do that before?
Right.
No one thought about that?
What were you going to say, Vincent?
I wanted to add to that, and that's the problem with the monsters themselves. They feel like an amalgamation of a whole bunch of stuff that we've seen from post-apocalyptic stories, video games, and films, that it just sort of becomes this amalgamation, but it never really finds its own identity to a certain extent. So I kept being reminded of, oh, it's that from that, without really going into specific spoilers.
Yeah, we definitely found some comparisons. At first I was like, are those the bugs from Starship Troopers? And then I looked at it and I saw the full design and I was like, oh, that's the thing from Cloverfield, just smaller.
Which seems to be every monster.
And it's just it's a typical template and design for monsters that's not unique. and it
Yeah.
kind of threw me off, took me out of the film a little bit. Also, the CGI is a little wonky, like they look fake.
When you see the
Yeah.
monsters in the light, the CGI kind of gets ropey at that point.
Yeah.
I think it's effective when you don't see much
When
of
they
it.
hide in darkness,
Yeah,
right?
when they're just playing with the lighting to make sure that
Yeah.
they don't show the limitations of the CGI. Usually that's what they have to do when they don't have the budget to really make the monsters look real.
Yeah.
And I would also add to that reference, for all you video game fans out there, you'll get some pretty hardcore Last of Us feels.
Yes.
from it.
Oh, yeah. The monster when they first when you first got a good look at it.
Yeah.
And again, not like too much spoiler, but I thought of, like you mentioned, the Cloverfield monster. I thought about the Demogorgon from Stranger Things. I'm like,
Yeah.
it seems like the go-to monster for horror these days is a mix of a cricket, a Venus flytrap, and a human.
Right.
And especially when you see these things in the light, it looks like something somebody who's really trying hard to make scary.
Yeah.
Like there's some interesting concepts there. The kind of razor claws, the way their faces are set up, like that's
Yeah.
unique. But outside of that, it's nothing. It's nothing you can't, like, you haven't seen before in fiction.
Now, here are my final thoughts. I think A Quiet Place is a decent movie for a Saturday night Netflix, or maybe a matinee.
Yeah.
But we live in
I
New
agree
York
with
City. 1650. No, you have to come with the heat. It has to be exceptional. So for me, out of 5 stars, I give it a 2.5. You don't have to take my word for it. You see it for yourself, but. Look, I live in the city. I have to save money. So, okay, what do you guys?
Yeah, it's a good first start for Kraskinski. I'm definitely curious to see where he tries to go next, if he tries to go somewhere else with like directing and writing. It's not a terrible horror movie. It's fine, but if you're gonna see it, do matinee price. Don't pay full price for this. I would, if I had to give it a numerical value, from 1 to 5, 2.5 to 3, somewhere in there. For out of 10, I'd give it a 6. It's fine, but don't pay full price for it.
Right. From my raw opinion and my raw score right now, it's a 3 out of 5, only because the first half is very promising, and the performances are top notch from both the adults and the children as well. And this is some really good children acting, for sure. I do think the cinematography at times is handled really well. The sound design is exceptional, but the uninspired monster, the tense second act, but ultimately the underwhelming third act, really is what brings it down for me. It had so much promise. It has a good concept. It had some really great directions it could have gone in, but ultimately it plays it safe. And ultimately it falls short because it had to play it safe, especially at the second.
Yeah.
Now, Vincent, tell people where they can find you online. I'm Valerie Complex, and you can find me on Twitter at Valerie Complex, one word, and on Instagram, Valerie_Complex.
My name is Justin. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Dashboard08, and you can find me on Instagram at KaiserLeo83, Kaiser with a Z.
Vincent Sang, you can find me on Twitter, The Review Machine. You can also find me on Instagram, In The Moment 47, as well as my blog called The Review Vault through Google's Blogger. You can find all my long-form reviews, which I plan on doing more soon.
Thank you, EJ, for filming us, and I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed this review from the Cinema Complexium folks. We don't know what we're going to see next, but we'll be back soon.
Oh, yeah.
Got a lot of hearts. A lot of hearts.
How you doing this up?
Yay!
Where's the back button? Where's the
I
back
just
button?
realized that's Charlize
Want to let
Theron.
you know, guys, we love hearts.
Yeah,
We're still online.